Hey class, Mrs. Scheffler here again. Today we're going to be looking at multiplication with decimals and whole numbers. Our essential question is, how can you use drawings and place value to multiply a decimal and a whole number? So to begin with, let's take a look at our word problem. In 2010, the United States Mint released a newly designed Lincoln penny. A Lincoln penny has a mass of 2 5/10 grams. If there are 5 Lincoln pennies on a tray, what is the total mass of the pennies? Well, let's think about what's important within that word problem. So let's go over here and let's read our questions to figure out what information we need to pull out. How much mass does one penny have? Well, I remember hearing that as we read the word problem, and it says a Lincoln penny has a mass of 2.5 grams or 2 5/10 grams. So we're going to record that on the line. Now our second question asks us, how many pennies are on the tray? Well, if we go back over and look at our word problem, it says if there are 5 Lincoln pennies on a tray. So we know that's going to be important, so let's highlight that. And then let's carry that over and fill in our blank. So far we've learned that each penny has a mass of 2.5 grams and that there are going to be 5 pennies on a tray. The last thing that we do with the word problem is we figure out what it is exactly it's asking us. So we look back at the question. What is the total mass of the pennies? So let's underline that so we remember what our question is. Now we have to figure out what operation it is we're going to use. And in our question is a key word, the word total. And we know when we see the word total, we are either going to add or we're going to multiply. So we have to look back at the rest of our word problem to figure out if we have groups or if it's going to require addition. And we realize that it's asking there are 5 Lincoln pennies on a tray. So there are going to be 5 groups of Lincoln penny. So we know when we see that there's going to be 5 groups, we will use multiplication. Now, let's go over it, and it says to use grouping language to describe what you are asked to find. Well, if you look over here on the side, it's showing us a model. We see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups of 1 whole, 2 whole, and 5 tally marks representing the 5/10. So there are 5 groups of 2 and 5/10. So step 1 requires us to estimate the product by rounding the decimal to the nearest whole number. We do that in order to see if our answer is going to be reasonable or not reasonable. So let's think about when we rounded 2 and 5/10. We're rounding to the nearest whole number, so we know that we're going to be rounding to the left of the decimal point in the ones place value. So in order to round, we have to look to our right, and we have a 5. And we know the saying is 5 or more, raise the score. So we know that we are going to raise our place value in the ones position. And we're going to raise it by 1. So we know that 5 times 3 equals 15. Now, step 2 requires us to multiply the tenths by 5. So let's look back over at our drawing as we're multiplying the tenths by 5s. We see that 5/10 times 5, and we have to figure out what 5 5/10 will equal. Well, we know that 5/10 is half of 1 whole. So we can take 5/10 and 5/10, and that will give us 1. We also have another 5/10 and 5/10, and that will also give us 1. And then we see there are 5 tally marks left over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we have 5/10 left over. So when we add these two together, we have 1, 2, and 5/10. So where it has to multiply the tenths by 5s, we know that 5/10 times 5 equals 1, 2, and 5/10. So we'll record the 2 and 5/10 in the blue box provided. Now step 3 is to multiply the ones by 5. So we do 2 times 5, or as the model shows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We know that 2 times 5 equals 10. So we will record the 10 in the blue box provided. Now step 4 is to add the partial products. And we'll remember from our previous chapter, in chapter 3, when we add with decimals, we need to make sure that our decimals stay aligned. And our 10 does not really have a decimal, so we just need to make sure that we do a mental thought that our decimal is to the right of the ones place. So when we add 2.5 or 2 and 5/10 plus 10, we will come with 12 and 5/10. And we will record our 12 and 5/10 in the blue box provided. Now we will also see that 12 and 5/10 is very close to our estimate of 15. We can also go back over to our picture model and we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 5/10. So we know our answer is correct. So if 5 Lincoln pennies have a mass of 12 and 5 grams. Now, let's look at another strategy we have for multiplying with whole numbers and decimals. Let's take a look at our second word problem. It says, having a thickness of 1 35 millimeters, the dime is the thinnest coin produced by the United States Mint. If you stacked 8 dimes, what would be the total thickness of the stack? Well, let's go back and pull out our important words. So it has a thickness of 1 35 millimeter. If you stacked 8 dimes, what would be the total thickness of the dime? And we have to underline our question. We see that word total again, and we've learned that total is addition or multiplication. Now if we go back into our word problem, you'll see that it states if you stacked 8 dimes, so the 8 dimes will be 8 groups. So step 1 is to multiply 8 times 1 35. So step 1, write the decimal factor as a whole number. Well, if you remember from lesson 4.1, we figured out that in order to multiply a decimal, in order to create a whole number, we have to multiply by the power of 10 that will move the decimal place all the way to the right until we have a whole number. In this case, we have 2 place values to the right of the decimal. So we know that we are going to have to multiply by 100 in order to move that decimal 2 places to the right. So when we have 1 35 times 100, that is going to give us 135. And you see that recorded right here. Now, we are multiplying that by our groups of 8. So you multiply 135 times 8 in the same way that you learned earlier this year. And that's 5 times 8 is 40, carry our 4, 3 times 8 is 24, plus 4 is 28, carry our 2, 1 times 8 is 8, 9, 10. So that gives us a whole number of 1,080. Now, in order to help us find our answer, we now have to go back the opposite way. So where we multiplied by 100th, now we're going to have to multiply by 100th. So we're multiplying by 0.01. So we are taking it back 2 places to the left. So if we look at our whole number of 1,080 and we multiply that by 100th, we are going to be moving our decimal place 2 places to the left. And when we move our decimal place 2 places to the left, we end up with an answer of 10 and 8/10, or 10 and 80/100. But of course you can drop the last zero as I did here. So a stack of 15 dimes would have a thickness of 10 and 8/10 millimeters. Now let's look at question number 1. Explain how you know the product of 8 times 1 and 35/100 is greater than 8. Well, we know that 8 times the whole number of 1 equals 8. So a number greater than 1, such as 1 and 35/100 multiplied by 8 would result in a product greater than 8. Now let's take a look at our next question. What if you multiplied 35/100 by 8? Would the product be less than or greater than 8? And we're going to explain. I know that 8 times 1 equals 8. I also know that a number less than 1, such as 35/100 multiplied by 8, would result in a product less than 8. Now we're going to get out our math journals and we're going to record our multiplying decimals, and we're going to model and do the algorithm. So go ahead and copy your notes down into your math journal. If you need additional time in writing down your math notes, you can always push pause on the video. Now in your planner, to show that you have completed your math homework, you need to have the password. The password is coming from a Chapter 3 vocabulary term, and it is an ordered set of numbers is a, and we learned in Chapter 3 that an ordered set of numbers is called a sequence. Be sure you record that in your planner for tomorrow.